A question which gets asked an awful lot on the forums and on Facebook is, which kind of foil should I get? What foil is best for the beginner? And I'm hoping to kind of answer some of those questions in this video. I'm going to look at two foils I've used an awful lot over the last 12 months. I've got to know both of them very, very well, and they're quite different, these two. You know, one is quite low aspect and the other one is medium to high. And I'm going to compare the various properties of these two wings and these two foils, and hopefully these will help you choose your next foil to see what things may suit you best, and yeah, to know what to be looking out for. So let's have a look at these two foils now. So first of all, we've got the AK. This is the AK Surf foil. It's a 1600. And the second is the Shinn Superhydro 1650. So very similar in terms of the area of the foil, but the two are quite different in the way they perform, and I'll go into the details of this later. First of all though, I'm going to look at the easiest bit, and that's the masts. So for the AK foil, this comes with an aluminium mast. This is a 70cm mast, which is a great length for a beginner. It's not too long. It means you can start in fairly shallow waters. And I would say this is a pretty good length to be starting with. It's quite heavy, and this does have some advantages. Basically, when you tip your board over, this will fall into the water pretty quickly, and your board will be ready to start riding on. It's also pretty durable. Aluminium, you're not going to break an aluminium mast. You might bend it if you're doing some crazy tricks, but it's a very durable and cost-effective option. On the other hand, if we look at the Shin carbon mast, now this is significantly lighter weight. Now this is an 82cm mast, so that little bit longer, you need that little bit extra water depth. It's hollow as well, which means this will generally float. So the difference between the two foils initially when you put it in the water is, as I said, the AK one will it'll sink straight away and the board will be sitting on top of the water in a position ready to go, whereas this one will generally float a bit more, and you actually have to force it down under the water so that it's ready to launch. One big advantage of carbon, aside from its weight, is its stiffness. You'd probably pick up an aluminium foil and think that is very, very stiff, but with the real extreme forces you can put on when you're loading against that wing, pushing hard upwind, there is a noticeable difference between the two foils in terms of the stiffness, the response and the feel you get between the two of them. But of course, carbon's a fair bit more expensive, and as with many things in this life, you get what you pay for. So let's go and have a look at the AK wing now, AK foil. So this is a low aspect foil. The aspect ratio is basically the ratio of this distance to that distance across the front wing. This works out at about 3.5 for this particular foil, and one of the real advantages of a low aspect ratio foil, and one of the things that's definitely true of this AK, is that it's very, very progressive in the way that it takes off out of the water. You can be riding along, you'll pick up speed, and it'll very, very gradually come out. There's no sudden surprises. It's very, very easy, and I think that makes it really perfect for a beginner. I think those characteristics also make it very good for kind of sup foiling and surf foiling as well. When you don't have that easy source of power and you're reliant on the waves, and it's only your balance that you're relying on, you do want a really kind of nice and easy, reliable wing foil until you really kind of nail it, and it becomes second nature to you. On the other side of the coin, This foil also stalls very, very progressively. In fact, it's very, very difficult to get this foil to stall at all. As you lose power, this will slowly just drop into the water, and it's actually really, really difficult to stall, even if you try and force it. It will, of course, stall if you really, really try to do it, but I think that's another reason why this is an excellent beginner-oriented foil. Another thing to mention about this AK foil is the fairly short fuselage length that's on this. The fuselage on this is about 65 centimetres, 70 centimetres, which is fairly short, and the fuselage basically works as the longer fuselage is basically put this rear stabiliser further away from you, and that basically gives it a larger leverage effect over the front foil, effectively kind of making the stabiliser more powerful. The other side of this is when you actually want to tip the foil up and down, this is going to be stopping you more. The longer the lever this is on, the lesser will be your ability to quickly change the angle of the foil. So this can be something that, if you're in the surf and you want to pump, or you want to turn quickly, you want that shorter fuselage. But if you want stability and ease of use, a longer fuselage can really be your best bet. If you want to do jumping or things like that, this shorter fuselage will allow you to whip the foil out of the water all that easier, pumping it down first and then up. With that shorter fuselage, it will give it that extra manoeuvrability you need for jumping it out of the water. It doesn't mean, of course, that you can't do it on a longer fuselage, but you will find it easier with this shorter fuselage. One other nice thing about the AK worth mentioning is it does have some adjuster screws here, and there's a kind of a cambered area that it sits in, and this allows you to just loosen these screws, moving that that wing forward, or adjust the camber, or backwards, so that you can adjust the amount of lift that this generates relative to the front wing. This can mean that you can tune it so that it's always trying to lift the front wing out, so it's always trying to make it foil, just to make it that little bit easier to get going. This will, of course, add a little bit more drag though. So this will reduce your amount of glide, due to the fact that it's always trying to lift that front wing up. And you don't get anything for nothing in foiling. When it's generating lift, it's also generating drag. I think that's about it for the AK foil. It's a great bit of kit, super user friendly. It turns very quickly as well. The shorter span of this front wing, and the quite pronounced curvature to it, means that it turns very easy. So it's it's designed as a surf wing, and so you can turn quickly on the face of a wave. But it's a very good stable foil, excellent for beginners, excellent for multidiscipline work, with the wing, with a paddle, or just prone surf foiling. Okay, so let's have a look at the Shinn Superhydro. So as I mentioned before, this is the 1650, so it's very much the same area as the AK. But despite that, I think this goes earlier. The higher aspect ratio wing generates more power for a given amount of speed, and as you can see, the aspect ratio of this is significantly higher. If you divide this width by this depth, you get about 6.5 for this Shinn Superhydro. This higher aspect ratio means that this Shin wing is a little bit more aggressive in the way that it comes out of the water. Once this starts to accelerate, it will actually start pushing quite hard on the front wing, and you'll feel extra pressure on the front of the board trying to lift out of the water. Generally what you want to do is you want to counteract that with increased front foot pressure, and as the board goes a little bit faster, the rear stabiliser will start kicking in and that front foot pressure isn't needed quite so much. This is quite in contrast to the AK, where it just picks up speed and it comes out ever so gradually. With this Shinn Superhydro, you know when it's going to want to lift, and you need to put in a little bit of foot pressure to keep it under control. But once it's up and foiling, it's very, very easy to ride. It's super, super locked in. This longer fuselage, as I was saying with the AK, puts that rear stabiliser further back and it gives it loads and loads of pitch stability. It's very, very stable. You know, you can muck about on the board, and you know it's very, very forgiving. It's not sensitive to where you put your weight quite so much as a shorter fuselage would be. This higher aspect ratio wing also means that it rides faster generally. These higher aspect ratio wings generally have less drag, and that's definitely the case for the Shinn Superhydro. This means that you're generally travelling faster for the same amount of wind speed and wind power. And this extra speed has got benefits and drawbacks. Of course, generally it's nice to be travelling faster, especially when you're getting into the intermediate and advanced levels. But when you're a beginner, you might appreciate those slower speeds. These differences in speeds can also make a difference to your manoeuvres. So when you're on the lower aspect ratio wings, you'll go into the turn fairly slowly. Let's say we're jibing. You go into the turn fairly slowly. It won't carry that much power and speed through the turn. And when you're in lighter winds, this means that generally you've got a little bit more power in your wing at all times. If you're on a higher aspect ratio wing, you'll come cranking into the turn, you'll turn downwind. There's a good chance that you might match the speed of the wind, or even overtake the speed of the wind. And you need to be that much better with your wing control, especially if you're riding in 10 to 15 knots. Obviously, when you're riding in 30 knots or something like that, it's much less of a difference, because you're still going to have 15 knots of wind, even though you're going 15 knots downwind. But in lighter winds, when it's 10 to 15 knots, that little bit of difference in the speed that you're carrying downwind can make jibes that little bit more difficult on the higher aspect ratio wings. You need to have your technique that much better with the wing to make sure it doesn't fall out into your feet, or you end up tripping over it. So I would say that for your first jibes, you'll probably find a lower aspect ratio wing that little bit easier, generally because it keeps power in the wing through that turn, because you're not running away from the wind quite so much. But I'm sure that once you get to a higher standard, you will appreciate the faster speed that you go through those turns on the higher aspect ratio wing. It's also worth mentioning that because the AK Surf foil has got that narrower wingspan, it is that much easier to turn. This has got quite a breadth that needs to turn through the water, whereas on this one, it's that bit slippier. So that one will turn somewhat tighter than this one, due to the fact that it's got less width to actually be pulling through the water. In terms of tacking, I would say that probably the higher aspect ratio wing is a little bit easier than the lower aspect ratio wing. And when you're tacking and when you want to stay on the foil, you appreciate that extra glide. You've got to get that wing over your head, effectively with the wind flapping, or with the wing flapping, and you appreciate that extra time that the foil will stay flying before you've got to get that wing down the other side and powering off in the other direction. Also things like when you move up to foiling 360s, again you'll appreciate the extra glide that higher aspect ratio wing will give you. In terms of wave riding, the Shinn Superhydro, with its higher aspect ratio and greater glide, will allow you to catch faster waves. You know, it's that bit more efficient, and it will carry that extra speed, which which the AK will struggle with once you get to a certain wave speed. Once on the wave, the AK will have that extra manoeuvrability, due to that shorter fuselage length and the greater sweep of the tips and the shape of the leading edge. But yeah, you can generally carry significantly more speed on the Shinn Superhydro. When you get to really fast waves, you'll want to start changing down the actual the area of the wing so that it can allow you to go faster, to keep pace with the wave, and actually to accelerate in front of the wave and really start carving on and off it rather than just riding with it or across it. So to wrap up, I think both of these wings are excellent. I would recommend the AK as a first wing. I think it's very, very easy to use, very, very predictable in the way it takes off and stalls. And it is a wing that you could be very happy with for a very long time. The Shinn Superhydro is a little bit more sporty, requires that little bit more technique to get going. But once up and riding, it's got that faster travel speed, extra glide, and it will make some of the manoeuvres a little bit easier, especially tacking and jibing at higher speed, which you'll appreciate when you become better at winging yourself. So that pretty much wraps it up for now. I hope you found this video interesting and useful. If you did, please hit that like button, and if you want to see more, then please do hit subscribe. That'd be awesome. Catch you later, everyone. Laters.